Lordy, look who is 40. Episode 40, that is, of Stand Up. That's right, I did it. I made it to episode 40. I haven't quit. 3 episodes a week of this show. Not gonna lie to you, I had 2 glasses of wine. If it sounds like I'm slurring a little bit here as I taped the intro on Tuesday night, that is why. I had such a good dinner this evening. My wife and my 12 and 15-year-old daughters, and we were just laughing and busting each other's chops. Everybody got theirs. Oh, it was great. Had a really good night. A really good night. My daughters and my wife are so awesome, and I love hanging out with them. All right, I'm doing a podcast, sorry. So this is episode 40 of Stand Up, where every episode I try to fight apathy, try to learn along with you about the issues that matter to you, your family, your community, your planet, and I couldn't do this without you. This podcast, and I am currently being sustained. Oh, I'm supposed to turn the music down. Sorry. Being sustained by Patreon. That's patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Go and sign up for a paid subscription. That means a lot. Give us a rating. Somebody said, what does it mean to give a rating? You know, wherever you listen to this podcast, you rate it. And then you can write a rating. Most of you, I think, listen on Apple's iTunes app on your phone. So you go and you take a second and write a couple of sentences. I love the podcast because of this or that. That makes a huge difference, apparently. So give it the 5 stars, give it a little rating. Got to tell you before I get to my guests, the great Charlotte Alter is going to join me. She is a young woman who I've known a long time. She's got an awesome new book called The Ones We've Been Waiting For, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. Then I talked to Bill B. in D.C., longtime listener, political insider, and a guy I've basically made into a pundit. And I'm going to talk to my wife, I think. I'm trying to get her down here real quick to talk about how we overschedule our kids or not, and why that's good, why it's bad. But I gotta tell you, last night, I killed a raccoon. That's right. Oh, let's turn the music down. I slammed into a raccoon while I was driving, and it was horrible. And I looked back, and it was jerking and shaking all over the place, and I felt horrific, and I was like, should I go back and kill it? And I didn't have the courage to do that. And when I drove back, on the way back from picking up my daughter and her friend from dance, it was dead. And I thought I was going to lose sleep over it. I felt horrible. What do I feel horrible about? I eat animals, and I couldn't even put this one out of its misery. I have an affinity for raccoons. When I was growing up, I saved these 2 baby raccoons, my friend Alex and I did. But this thing was dead. I moved it off the road on the way back, and I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to sleep. I feel horrible. Absolutely horrible. And would you believe that I had the best night of sleep that I've had in like 3 weeks? I didn't even have to get up and take a piss, which is something that's pretty common for the 44-year-old man. Not once. So, I don't know. I can't make odds or ends of what's going on in my life. All right, let me get my wife down here, and then we'll throw to Charlotte Alter, and we'll talk to Bill B. in D.C., Lots coming up on today's episode of Stand Up. You want to turn people on with your heavy breathing?
Yeah, and give you a lot of work, a lot of editing to do.
That means she's in the studio. There she is, everybody. My wife is here, and I asked her to come down because we are raising 12 and 15-year-old daughters, and everybody loves when she joins the podcast now. She's brilliant and articulate and thoughtful, and we are going through some challenges with our daughters, and I asked her if we could talk about this one publicly, on the podcast, and she was like, yeah, it's cool, because our 12-year-old, Julia, has decided she wants to quit dance, and she does a bunch of different dance classes, and there's a lot to talk about here in terms of the activities that your kids do, the question of how overscheduled are your kids. You're paying for them to do all of these different sports classes or dance classes or extra things that are outside of school. And let me just stipulate, we can only do this because we have certain resources, because we have money. And who knows how much longer we'll be able to do it. But the point is, we do understand that the vast majority of Americans can't afford this. But a lot of you can relate to this, and it's a really interesting debate. So Val, sorry, I was just trying to set it up there. Julia is 15. Julia is 12. Ava is 15. And Julia has been complaining for how long about dance. She doesn't want to do it anymore. She does ballet. She does jazz. She does something called acro. And is there another one? Yeah.
Point.
And point. Ballet and point. There she is. There's Val.
Hello.
So what? Is it too hot?
No, I'm just trying. I'm just taking a breath.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, so Julia wants to quit, and it has been challenging for us because this is where she gets her physical activity. And we're basically worried that if she's not doing this, then she's what? I mean, what is your big concern about her wanting to quit?
Well, this is recording, right? Because it doesn't show up on the screen.
Yeah, no, the old thing over here is recording. Don't you?
Well, usually it's on the screen.
Stop looking at the computer. Nobody knows.
Oh, okay.
It's recording. See the record button over here? It's recording here
okay.
now,
It's
so I can
red.
edit it.
Okay.
I can edit your slurps and breaths out.
You're gonna edit that? Okay, thanks.
No, I'm not going to edit anything. It's a burden.
You really should.
No, go ahead.
So the concern has become that if she stops dancing, that she's not going to be moving her body. And I think it's becoming more of a priority to me as she gets older. And I see that when she's not dancing, when she's not like doing a scheduled activity, she doesn't do anything.
She does too. She looks at her phone.
She doesn't do anything physical.
Why are you taking away from her? She stares at her phone. That's
right.
physical.
So that's the issue. When, working in this fitness industry and working with youth for as long as I have, we take it for granted that kids move. Generally they move, right? They don't have, like, their structured activities are not so they can get exercise, because they're kids. They should be out there playing and getting their exercise. It's more for them to have something, to get experiences, to learn different skills, right? What do you like? What are you gravitating to? Do you like music? Do you like art? Do you like dance? Do you like sports? Do you like, right? But as they get older, they start moving less and less and less. They're not out there playing. Right. They're not on the slides. And especially now, this generation is a completely different.
Sorry, did you say they're not on the slides?
They're on the slides with the swings, the playground.
like slides or something. No, so
my point is as they age, they do less and less. And I think they're doing less and less now than they did when we were
So
kids,
I think that's
right?
really important.
Because they're first of all, we're a culture that's completely afraid. We've become this
terrified generation of bedwetters, of parents who are terrified their kids.
And I think that's mainly a middle upper class issue.
Great point.
But it is an issue. So kids.
Great point. Yeah.
Kids do not, they're not encouraged to go outside because parents do not want them out of their sight.
Right.
So you don't see kids generally in this middle class culture outside playing. I think different communities have different, but I could say for the majority, that's an issue. It's the safest time, but we're the most afraid.
I think that this generation of parents, or my parents, our parents' generation, they react to the fact they think we overschedule our kids. They think that we have our kids in too many extra. I can't believe that you're paying for this many classes, or you're paying for private. And I'm open to that argument, and I was actually kind of persuaded and kind of agreed with that they're overscheduled. Let them have more free time. But the reason why I wanted you to join me tonight is because, well, you already made a bunch of really good points, but is this point that you made about This generation is different. And you already touched on it. This generation, yes, they maybe we can see that they're overscheduled, but you must understand, older folks, if we don't have them structured activities, they will sit in front of a goddamn screen. Well, and we did not have that. Talk about a TV, and you can talk about Nintendo as much as you want. It is not the same.
Right. We didn't have the internet. But we also didn't have parents that forced their kids to stay inside. And
yeah, you got to keep reiterating that. It's a good point. Yeah. Parents are terrified to let their kids outside.
Or you know,
they're going to get kidnapped. They're going to get Lyme's disease. They're going to drown.
So we now have you know, childhood diabetes is becoming an epidemic.
Childhood obesity, which leads to that.
Obesity and diabetes. And it's because these kids, you know, they're not moving and they're sitting home and they're eating more than they did because you're bored, right? You're home, you're on your screen, you're bored, you eat. When you're outside and you're playing,
and you're not
thinking about
apples and bananas.
So there's that. So when Julia tells me that she wants to quit dance, I don't go to, oh, okay, now we're going to save tons of money. I immediately think, you know, which is a plus right now, but I go to, okay, well, what are you going to do to replace that time? Because that's a big chunk of her time. That's about 5 hours a week when that's ballet that she's quitting right now. That's fine. What are you going to do to replace that?
Snapchat.
Right. So when she's not dancing and homework, they have like 20 minutes of it a night, if that.
She's in 6th grade.
Yeah. And so the rest of the time it's fighting with her not to be on her phone.
Right.
Or I'm bored. Can I have so-and-so over? Can I go in so-and-so's house? Which is okay. Let's schedule a hangout. But when you have the hangout, again, they're on their phone. They're not sitting, they're not moving, they're not playing, they're not jumping. They're on their phone. They're calling people, they're FaceTiming. They're mostly on their phone when they're hanging out. It's not like when we were hanging out.
And it's not to say, just to be clear, it's not to say that we were better. It's not to say that our parents were better. I think that we need to judge I think
we were just moving more. Yeah, we were just moving more in general.
We're a product of the technology available in our time.
Right. Exactly.
So it's not blame, it's not judgment, it's just the way it is. So for our parents, for those of you in your 60s and 70s, judging us for overscheduling our kids, we're here to tell you we didn't have iPhones. Mm-hmm. We didn't have all of these things. And we didn't have, frankly, all of these choices for classes weren't available as well. Sure, we had dance and we had sports, but there's just so much more available. And if you have the resources, it's just different. And so we're navigating, our generation of parents is navigating a different time in terms of technology, in terms of the fear, the helicopter parent. It's just different. It's not judgment. It's just understand these are the times that we're living in and these are the choices that we have to make. And I brought you down here to talk about specifically our situation with our daughter. She wants to quit moving in this one class, which she's been in for 7 years, ballet and now pointe. Mm-hmm. And her older sister is in.
So we're in a dilemma that I think a lot of parents face at this age when kids have done a specific sport for a certain amount of years or dance for a certain amount of years, and then they get into middle school and high school and they're, oh, that's not cool anymore, and I don't feel like doing that, and I'm not going to do it. It's just not, as the novelty wears off. Mm-hmm. They become more independent. They want to have their own, time. So I think parents, are kind of stuck in a position of what do I do?
So what do we do?
So what do we do? I mean, that's where I come into play. So for the, the privileged people, they will hire a personal trainer to come to their house and work with their kid. But that's not, a luxury most people can afford.
So most of us can afford maybe a class, not even most of us can afford, but putting your kid in a class.
I literally am right away I started thinking, what am I going to do with her? Yeah. What are the options? She's still young. If she was in high school, I would say, okay, go to a gym, because this is an important part, time in life to start building habits, right? in lifestyle. It's just so much easier to start that now, to make exercise a normal part of life, movement a normal part of life, activity,
sports,
like,
dance, hiking.
Right, like falling in love with that feeling of moving your body, of stretching your muscles, of feeling sore, of feeling of becoming stronger.
Accomplishment.
Yeah. And then having that sense of like, yes, accomplishment and goal setting. I think that's really important to instill when they're young, because as you get older, it's harder. It's always harder to
You know
face.
that as a personal trainer, when you have a client that says, I never did anything growing up, and now you got to introduce them to exercise.
It's just so much harder as you get older to change habits. I mean, obviously it's completely doable, and adults do it all the time. But the longer you go, the harder it is. You build those pathways, and it's a lot harder to change it.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to instill. I danced, all the way through middle school until high school, and then I had to start working. But it instilled that in me.
And I did sports.
That love of movement, and it carried me through. And I think that's just an important aspect in a child's life. And so when she decided that this was no longer something she wanted to pursue, it's like you have to figure out as a parent, I think, do we push them to do it because, oh, well, you don't want to do it? Does that mean you don't have to do it?
Well, it does.
So I think there was a little bit of a struggle, deciding if we should let her decide. And ultimately, we pushed it for as long as we could, but realizing that she really did not like it. So we made the decision for her to decide on what to do. But it came down to, you have to do something. You can't not move your body. And she knows what I do for a living. She knows how important this is. So she's going to try different things. And ultimately, I think the way I think I want to handle this, and we talked about it, is if she comes, because, Julia doesn't like hard work. We talked about this. She's not the type of kid that loves.
Since she was little, we go for a long walk. It's like, pick me up. We go for a long bike ride. Oh.
She does not like
go for a hike. Are we almost done? Yeah.
Right. She doesn't want to be uncomfortable at all. And so
I'm sweating. That's the idea.
So, yeah. So what is it that I want to instill? What we want to instill in this kid, that if it's hard, that we just give up and just don't do it. Right. That everything has to be easy in life.
Well, what do you think?
So, it's okay. If you don't find anything that you really, truly enjoy doing, then you're going to have to find something you don't enjoy doing. You're going to have to do it, because guess what? Your health is that
paramount.
Important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, just though, I'll let you go after this. I know you want to go to bed, but what do you think just about the idea of quitting? I talked to my mom today about this, and she was torn, and I'm torn. I'm not sure about, like, the idea of letting your child quit something because they don't like it or that it's too hard. I used to think, I grew up thinking, never quit, never quit. I had the don't quit poem. I think there's a lot of truth to not quitting, to sticking something out, to finishing something, especially when you're part of a team and so on. But I also am completely open to the argument that if you hate something, you shouldn't have to do it. Find something that you have of a passion for and pursue that, especially as an adolescent. So I can see it both ways. How do you look at quitting? Do you have a hard and fast feeling on it, or you have a lot of clients you always have that are adolescents and younger, and for your own self, quitting for our kids? Okay, so first let me just comment on what you said about finding a passion, because I don't think that all people know what their passion is. And good point. I don't think that you might search your whole life. Right. I think it's following your curiosity. Like,
What's her name?
Brene Brown?
No, not Brene Brown.
Oh, I know
Gilbert. Elizabeth Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert
Yeah.
about this was such a great...
Following your curiosity.
But
Don't
she
follow
did that
your
TED
passion.
Talk, and she did the hummingbird.
Yeah.
Is that right?
And the sledgehammer.
Oh, I love that. Do we need to explain that? Just the hummingbird just going around from flower to flower trying new things.
Mm-hmm. So following your curiosity, because passion is just such a heavy thing. And if you don't have one, you feel like a failure. And so what does that mean? If you don't find your passion, then you just don't do anything. So just follow your curiosity. And look, if there's no exercise or no movement that you totally love, then do something that you like, that you love, that you hate a little less. But so people just might not be into moving, but you're into walking. I mean, everyone can walk. There are some things that you can do, and maybe you do it because you like it more than other things, but it's not like my passion. It's not my go-to. As far as quitting, I think it's okay to quit. Definitely think it's okay to quit, but it's a hard one because especially as a parent, it depends. And as a parent, it's you want to push your kids to do and to follow through because
persevere.
Right. And you don't want them to think when it's hard that you stop. And I also preface this all the time that because Julia is the type of kid that she wants to be good at things. And if she's not good at them, she doesn't want to do them. That is,
hold on. I just want to highlight that. That is such an important point for people listening to understand. It's so, if she's not good at it, she doesn't make her feel good. She doesn't want to be in it. Who can't relate to that? It's a really important point. It's not like you're protecting their feelings necessarily. It's just an important thing to recognize.
Yeah, but I think it's important to highlight that you don't need to be the best at everything you do. I think what happens is you go into something and you're constantly striving and comparing yourself to other people, and then
wanting the teacher's recognition, right, and the awards and the
right. So if you matter, even if you're not the best, like that's what I, constantly try to tell her. So I think that striving for perfection, it's not about perfection. It's about progress.
That's a really good point. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. Your own individual progress.
Right. And
not winning, not being the best, just you becoming better.
Right. So it's that mindset.
You're so smart.
As you're going into what you're doing. It's not about being better than anybody else. It's just progressing at what you're doing. So I try to, make that the goal. Right. And so the quitting, it's what is it? I think it's trying to find out what is it about this that you want to quit? Is it because you're not the best? Is it because you're not getting recognition? Is it because you don't feel good in it? What is it exactly? So figure out the why you want to quit and then take it from there. Now, obviously, if it's painful, if it's torture, if it's, Julia's getting to the point where she just was dreading it. And we tried to figure out exactly what it was. And she's just like, I just don't like it. I never loved it. I never really loved it. And now I'm just liking it less. It's just not fun. I don't enjoy it. I want to find, okay, fine. We tried for a long time. She's liking it less and less and less. And now it's time, she's old enough. I think she's not, a child. And
let me just ask you one more thing about this, because I wonder if we haven't talked about this, and I wonder if you've thought about it. Anybody with more than one child, you look in this case at our younger daughter and say, how much is she comparing herself to her older sister, Ava, who's 15, who still likes dance, who's really good at dance. And she doesn't, all she sees is her older sister doing this thing, but it doesn't mean that you have to be like your older sibling.
Right.
I mean, but that's all they know. They don't know any better. So like part of the pressure seems like I have to do this because she did it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm sure that was part of her reasoning. I'm sure there was a whole bunch of, things that have contributed.
Expectations.
Yeah, expectations and thoughts and, but ultimately she just, you just know that it's time. And, but I think you have to weigh it heavily.
Yeah.
Because it's not something to take like lightly, because to set that precedent that, when it's hard and when it's difficult, then you could quit, that's when you push through. Oftentimes when it's hard and difficult, push through, because that's when you reap the most reward, right? When you do something that's so challenging and then you accomplish it. Sure. That's when,
And to learn that at a young age is really key.
Right. To learn that exactly. So I think even in adulthood, we have these decisions to make constantly. Should we quit? Should we end it? And it's not so black and white. There's so much nuance in that. It's figuring out.
But it is the kind of thing where people do make it binary. You quit or we don't quit in this family. There's no quitting here. And it's like, no, I want to quit. This is horrible.
Well, you got to weigh the costs and benefits. Right. Always weighing the costs and benefits.
Right.
And
be open-minded and have there be some gray areas, some nuance with. Treat each child differently and each activity differently as every individual has their own journey. How am I doing? Is that right? I mean, yeah, of course. All right, cool. Yeah. Well, I think you said a lot of really smart things and gave people a lot to think about, because I feel like parenting, so often we put ourselves in these categories of parenting. We put our kids in these categories and we have these expectations. The same expectations for one child as another child, expectations for ourselves as parents. But I think that what you're basically saying here is, no, there's a lot of different nuance and gray area and situation and way to treat each kid in their own journey without letting them.
Yeah, and parenting is just, there's no easy answer. And I think we all try our best, and there's just so many things out there, and so many, this is what you should do and this is how you should do it. It's, it's just
expectations and judgments and shoulding.
Well, it's just parents are under a lot of pressure, and it's not easy. And then we're afraid the parent shaming thing.
Parent shaming, yeah, we got a whole long conversation about that.
Is absolutely horrible.
Although, can I just say this real quick?
It's a new thing. It's a new.
I might parent shame others. I don't know. I hope I don't. But I don't feel like I've been parent shamed. Like, I don't think I've felt that. Is that a female thing, do you think? Is that a mom thing? Do dads do that as much?
I think we do that. I mean, we wouldn't have a party. I would never have a teen party here, because God, if like anything happened, I would be totally shamed.
Well, and you should be. That's wildly irresponsible.
And you just the very fact of, okay, for example, we are a little bit more liberal than we're more free range. I wouldn't say we're more free range than most in our community. And so, when we had play dates when they were younger, I was like constantly like, oh gosh, are they gonna, what are they gonna think if I let my kid, play in the woods? They're gonna think I'm like this neglectful mother, and they're gonna, I'm like this horrible. I let my kid walk down. I mean, I think I'm just more sensitive to it than you are. You just probably don't care what people think, and I'm like,
that's never the case, except for maybe this category.
Maybe this category, exactly, because I'm usually the one that doesn't care.
Yeah.
But I'm so
that's the only.
I'm so tied in. Like, motherhood is so. It's my identity at this point, and that's like a whole issue that, of course I need to work through.
Let's talk about parent shaming another time. All right. That is awesome. Fascinating. Thank you very much for coming down. I know you want to go to bed. Thank you. I love you.
Okay.
You're the greatest.
Goodbye.
You're so smart and awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, there goes my wife. That is Valerie Vendrame. You can follow her on Twitter at VVYoga and TrueYouYoga.net. And now let's get to my next guest. It is Charlotte Alter, who is a brilliant young writer and journalist. She works at Time Magazine. She's just published her first book, which is called The Ones We've Been Waiting For: How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. Charlotte Alter coming up. Then one more conversation with a third guest, Bill B. in D.C., talking the politics of impeachment, the presidential campaign, why he disagrees with my brother and Eric Siegel, who joined me on the last couple of episodes of this podcast. He's coming up as well. But right now, here is my conversation with Charlotte Alter. Well, I'm recording, so you know, and I am going to introduce you because this is cool. I mean, I literally watched Charlotte Alter grow up. I worked with both of her parents, got to know her whole family and her siblings, and I'm really been rooting for her whole life, her whole family. It's been really exciting to see her explode onto the national scene as a highly respected young reporter and now author. She's a national correspondent for Time magazine. She covered the 2016, 2018, and she'll be covering the 2020 campaigns, which sounds like a fun time. She's covered youth social movements, women in politics. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. She's one of the authors on the cover story for Time magazine about their Person of the Year, Greta Thunberg. And now she has a new book. It's coming out in February. It's already getting rave reviews by influential, smart people. It's called The Ones We've Been Waiting For: How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlotte Alter joining me now.
Hey, Pete. It's so great to be here.
I am very glad to have you. I've really, I mean, I meant when I said, obviously, just been rooting for you. I think I met you while you're probably in high school and followed your time in college, and then just, you know, your reporting. It's been very exciting. Can we start with kind of a personal question? Because knowing your parents, knowing your family, Charlotte's mom is Emily Lazar, and I knew her from my time working at the Colbert Report, where she was an executive producer, booked all the guests. Her dad, of course, best-selling author, very respected reporter, Jonathan Alter, who's written biographies of FDR. He's working on a new one. He wrote a great book about President Obama. But my question to you is, how did you become Charlotte Alter? Like, I love to talk to, because I'm raising daughters, women who are successful, who are confident, who are independent, about their childhood, about their lives, and what contributed to them. I know it's a weird and tough question. I don't know how you can possibly answer it, but who made you? What made you? That's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer. I feel like there are a couple things. I mean, I obviously, you know, it's a tremendous privilege to be raised by, you know, people who are smart and engaged in the world the way my parents were. And I had a ton of opportunities, which obviously had a huge impact on me. I think it's kind of about, I think it also sort of depends on what you want, right? And for me, you know, some people go into the world wanting to make a lot of money. Some people go into the world wanting to become famous. Some people go into the world wanting to be notable or to, you know, have a family or whatever. And for me, the thing I always really wanted was to kind of like be where the action was, you know, and like be a witness to things that were happening in the world. And I think that kind of steered me towards what I'm doing now. But yeah, I mean, I had a lot of lucky breaks. I had a lot of privilege, but also I think that, and on top of that, I think that I was doing this work at a time of tremendous kind of turnover. Yeah. And, you know, where some of the old assumptions about how things worked in the 20th century, particularly in politics, kind of melted away when Trump was elected. And that's a lot of what my book is about. Anyway, so yeah, Pete, I truly don't know the answer to that question. Maybe my parents know, or maybe you might even know better than me. I just sort of feel like I always try to just do the next right thing, or the next thing that makes sense. When did you kind of know that you wanted to go into journalism?
I didn't want to go into journalism. I wanted to be a TV writer. And I basically tried to be a TV writer. I was an assistant on Girls on HBO. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah, I do actually.
One of my first jobs out of college was I was first an intern in the locations department on Girls, and then I got a job as an assistant to one of the showrunners. And I did that job for about 8 months, and then I got brutally fired.
What do you mean?
Because I just was like, I didn't do anything. It was clear that it was like not a good fit for me. And I was sort of, I just was fired. Like it was like goodbye. And that sucked. And then I came back to New York, and then I started working as a production assistant on various like short films. And I was freelancing, and I was sort of, doing this work where I would print out the lunch menus for people on the set and make sure everyone got the right sandwich and make sure that there was a place to park the truck and all this stuff. And then I was freelancing, and then I heard that they were hiring at Time to work on their web team, the people who kind of write the aggregation stories, like the quick hits. And so I applied, and I had a friend from college who, was working there, and I reached out to him, and then I got hired there, and then I sort of worked my way up.
Quick question about your mom and your dad in terms of what they contributed. Were there any seminal moments? Were there any lessons? Were there ethic or moral or instrumental lessons that they taught you? Your mom, I got to know really, really well and got pretty close with, but I was and still am like pretty intimidated by. She's very confident and smart person, and I would always be honest with her, ask her questions, make suggestions and ideas for things when I worked at the Colbert Report, and she was always so honest and and forthright. And I guess maybe I hadn't been around a lot of women in television that were like that, but I had great admiration for it. And I wonder, what she role modeled or taught. Was she someone who said, do this, do that? Or was she someone who just role modeled behavior? Tell me about what you learned from her.
I think that it's hard. It's not like we ever had one conversation where I was like, oh, a lesson. Let me put this jewel of a lesson into my lesson box. It was like, I think that her way of approaching the world, which is sort of at once deeply rational and also really emotionally intelligent, I think is one of the things that I try to emulate. But I think that, I think that she is just kind of like her sort of philosophy is like, show up and do the work kind of. And so I think that has kind of turned into mine. And then my dad is a little bit more like, how can this be as big as it can possibly be? What can this turn into? So there's like an element of that also. So, both of those two things together have helped me a lot, but also it can create a lot of anxiety too. So, it's a double-edged sword.
Anxiety in terms of the expectations or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of everything that they've accomplished in their careers and looking at them and thinking about what you're going to do or?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it cuts both ways. It cuts more one way than the other, but it definitely does cut both ways.
Well, I wonder about that because you've had, over the last year, I don't know how many cover stories that you've had your name on at Time Magazine, which is such a big deal. And I get so excited to see that, having seen your growth, growing up and your success. It's so great. And now you've got a book. It's coming out in February. It's already getting really great reviews. It's called The Ones We've Been Waiting For, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. You've covered, these campaigns. And so I want to get into that, and I wanted to start by just talking about this Time Magazine, the Person of the Year, Greta Thunberg. You were one of a few names who authored that story and leading that, obviously into the book because of she's a young woman and it has really changed the world. So what are we to think about her? How controversial is she? How much of a disruptor is Greta Thunberg?
Well, one of the things that has been really interesting since I wrote that story is how many people are in my inbox basically saying climate change is a hoax.
Oh, wow. Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
they find you. They find that's interesting simply because they find your email. And
yeah,
is that what you mean?
yeah.
They email you?
Well, they email me, but also it's interesting that still, even with all the science on her side, there are a lot of people out there, grown ass adults, who are just refusing to believe what every major scientist and the UN and every nation in the world besides us has internalized.
I know, but and I'm sure they don't attach their age to it. But what do you think, and what is the polling or data say about what young people, certainly what millennials, think about climate change and the science? Because I'm sure most of those people who deny the consensus of the crisis of our time, the existential crisis of our time, are not young people.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's one of the things that I found that was really interesting in reporting the book was particularly among Republicans, climate change is one area where younger Republicans are with it on the science, and older Republicans are much more likely to be it's a hoax, right. And so that's one kind of area that transcends party, where pretty much everybody under the age of 40 accepts that man-made climate change is a fact and that it's something that's going to, radically impact the way people live. The difference is really in what should be done about it. And that's where there is still a distinction between Democrats and Republicans, because young Democrats like AOC are pushing for a Green New Deal, which is a huge overhaul of our economy in order to address the threat of climate change, which, certainly something like that is probably going to be necessary. And then there are sort of young conservatives who, are willing to say the science is real. I'm not a climate denier, but maybe the transformation doesn't have to be as huge, or maybe something can be done with just a carbon tax, or maybe something can be done with cap and trade, or, it's sort of more nibbling around the edges of a solution.
Right. Markets and capitalism will innovate our way out of this problem.
Right. I mean, and I think probably the answer is probably a little bit of both. But, the other thing to consider is that markets and capitalism also got us into this problem in a big way. Yeah. And so, I think probably the only way out of it is some kind of solution that harnesses markets, but also heavily regulates them. I don't know that anybody is advocating for there definitely are people who are advocating for let's just all become socialists. But I think what's more likely is as this new generation comes into power, there's going to be just a bigger appetite for government regulation of the economy towards a green future. Towards away from fossil fuels and towards sort of green energy and, a carbon neutral carbon footprint.
And, obviously this is a planetary problem. So even if America were to come to some kind of consensus or solution for it, you need the most populated countries, you need every country in the world to come together on it. And so your book, though, is mostly about how a new generation of leaders will transform America. And so we're mostly talking about young Americans. And you cover a lot, obviously, here in the book, but tell everybody about the proposal for this idea for this book and what it covers, because it covers a lot. So it covers a lot, and yet there also are some pretty specific limitations. So this book is specifically about millennials. So it's about people born in between 1981 and 1996. So I have done a lot of coverage on the Parkland kids and Greta Thunberg and some of these young activists. And that is I'm super interested in them. They're in the book, but the book's not about them. The book is about young elected leaders who are already kind of working their way up. Either they're running cities and small towns like South Bend, Indiana, for example, or Ithaca, New York has a very young mayor who's been doing
some really interesting stuff. Or they're running for Congress, or they're on city councils, or they're running for president, like Pete Buttigieg. Right. So basically the fundamental thesis is, if you look at our government right now, we have the oldest first-term president. He's surrounded by one of the oldest and whitest and most male cabinets in history. In his first term, before this most recent wave of young people and women got elected in 2018, like when Donald Trump was elected, the Congress that was elected with him was one of the oldest in history. And the median age in Congress had gone up 10 years since the 1980s. And you saw in those first 2 years of his presidency, there were all these things where, Mark Zuckerberg was testifying in front of the Senate, and the octogenarian senators didn't understand Facebook, and he had to explain to them how Facebook worked. How could they possibly regulate it if they don't even really understand what it is? Right. And so it was just this, I started writing this book when I just was kind of like, this is not going to last forever. This is a completely unsustainable situation that we're in because our country is run by old people. And so I was like, okay, let me look at the young people who are kind of coming up behind them and figure out sort of what motivates them, what they believe, why they believe it, and sort of what they've already done in the places where they've had some kind of real power to, indicate, okay, when their generation is in charge, here are the kinds of things that they're going to be concerned with. And so I spent a lot of time looking at cities and towns that have millennial leadership. I was really focused on the young women who ran for office, who ran for Congress and won in 2018. And, and I also tried to make sure that, there are young Republicans too. Most young people are liberal, but there definitely is a strain of young Republicans. And so I include, for example, Elise Stefanik, who you might remember from the impeachment hearings. She's in the book. Yeah. Or Dan Crenshaw, the guy with the eye patch, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and lost his eye. Yep. So the book is basically follows these 10 young leaders from 9/11 onwards, and it gets into all the things that have influenced both their individual lives and the broader lives of most people their age. So, for example, 9/11, the rise of technology and how millennials are both the first digital natives and also the last people who one day will remember what it was like before the internet.
I find that fascinating.
There will be a time, probably 70 or 80 years from now, where people my age are going to be the last people who remember what it was like before cell phones or before internet, that's going to be really interesting. I get into how the financial crisis impacted millennials in a really devastating way. And, that compounded with all the student debt that many people in this generation have, has completely shaped their financial and economic outlook. And when people are really confused about why millennials are socialists, it's obviously millennials are socialists. They have so much debt. They got totally screwed in the financial crisis. They can't get a job that gives them health insurance. It is so baffling to me that older people who grew up with all of these kind of this real sense of economic security that came from a lot of government investment in the social safety net, when they're now suddenly scolding young people for demanding what they had their whole lives, it's really rich.
They don't seem to even be able to begin to understand the struggles of millennials, the financial struggles, the lack of opportunity, the lack of health insurance, the threat of climate change, thinking about their future. It seems to be really very difficult for other older generations to understand. And so I think that's probably common, when you generational ignorance and not understanding younger people, for sure. And I wonder, what if any stereotypes, Charlotte, do you think are accurate? I mean, how do you even generalize about a generation of people? But when you hear these things about millennials, of which you are a member of, what is the one that is the most wrongheaded or irksome or upsetting to hear in terms of stereotypes or generalizations about your generation of people?
So, it's interesting. This is like going to sound really ironic for somebody who just wrote a book about a generation, but like, I think that a lot of stereotypes are tricky because they're often wrong, but also they're exactly what you said. They're too broad of a generalization. So I try to like root everything in a poll. So for example, when I say that millennials believe in climate change, that's because like polls say that they do, right? So, right. But one of the things that I also kind of realized while I was working on the book is that a lot of the individual qualities that people find grating about millennials, like people say, oh, millennials are entitled, they're naive, they're narcissistic, they're obsessed with their phones, like all of these, everyone's heard all of these, like all of that may be true, right? For the individual millennial that in your office, like I'm sure people would say that about me. Like, yeah, I'm sure, that kid who's working next to you is like really annoying in a lot of ways, right? But collectively, when you have collectively millions of people who have that same sense of entitlement, quote, so to say, entitlement, that looks a lot like, demanding a stronger social safety net. Collective, if the one kid sitting next to you is on his phone all the time, collectively, that's a generation who is about to use technology to radically transform the way we do American politics, right? If individually the kid who, drives you crazy at your office seems like he's really naive about how things work and the ways of the world, collectively, that's a generation that maybe isn't taking old assumptions for granted and is thinking really differently about about structural change. And that's one of the big theses of this book. And one of the reasons why I really hope everybody will pre-order it, because it's out in February, is that this generation, and I don't know if it's necessarily because of them or because of the times or whatever, but there's a transformation happening between thinking of change as something that is led by one person and thinking of change as something that is done collectively and systemically. So one of the ways that we see that is particularly with Obama, right? So Obama was a president who had tremendous amount of young support, like young people elected Barack Obama. And then he gets elected, and it becomes clear to many young people that there are things that, like, no matter how awesome he is, no matter how cool he is, no matter he is on BuzzFeed and he's doing cool shows and he's like the cool Black president, there are still systemic problems that are beyond the scope of one person to fix, no matter how powerful and amazing he is. And so that's where you get these movements like Occupy and Black Lives Matter, which basically which arose almost as a rebuke to the idea of change being made by a single person. So if you look at Occupy, the whole point of it is collectivism. And journalists would cover both of these movements and say, like, who's the leader? Where's the Martin Luther King Jr. of Black Lives Matter? Right. I don't see I don't see a Malcolm X. I don't see who's the guy in charge? Who's the woman in charge? Who's the person who says here are our demands? And the activists would say, this is a leaderful movement. We're all leaders. We don't. There's no one person who's in charge, because they are rejecting the very idea of a singular person making all the calls, partly because they saw with Barack Obama that, under the first Black president, systemic racism was still very much, happening, and Black kids were being shot and killed in the streets by police officers, So if it could have been changed by one person, it would have been. And so, and I think that that's very connected to, that shift is very connected to the rise of technology, which gave many more people voices and made it way easier to organize large groups of people. And it also connects back to what you were asking before about stereotypes about millennials. It also connects back to the special snowflake thing, right? So, a lot of people say about millennials, oh, everyone has to be special. Everyone gets a trophy. Everyone's a special snowflake. Well, is it then such a surprise that when these social movements arise that are by by and for millennials in a lot of ways, those are movements that are leaderful movements that where everybody feels a sense of responsibility to be in charge. Everybody feels a ownership over it, and there's not as much of a hierarchy of like, this guy's the leader and this is the secondary leader and here are his followers.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, I was thinking about how this generation has, is it wrong to say, an easier time in terms of organizing because of technology, because of social media, because of the internet, and then you said it. But what about just, I know you've written a lot about this as well. I'm not sure how much it comes up in the book in terms of the leaders that you covered. And everybody has to get this book, The Ones We've Been Waiting For, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. It's the book we've been waiting for. It's available for pre-order. What about gender and ethnicity and intersectionality? Like, this generation has a place at the table for women and people of color and, even, if I could say, even trans people and different sexual orientations. How does that change this generation, create an opportunity for a whole nother class of people rather than just white male straight leaders?
Well, this is another, we were talking earlier about climate. This is another issue that sort of transcends party lines, right? The young Republicans that I talked to, for example, Elise Stefanik, who is very solidly conservative, right? Her main political goal right now, or one of the things that she's very focused on, is getting more women and diverse women into the GOP, right? That's like one of the things that she's really devoting her time and energy to. One of the things that I looked at in the book is where the Republican Party was going before Trump, because Trump came in and like stomped over everything. Right. So before Trump, you had this generation, not a whole generation, but you had a cohort of young, diverse Republicans who were elected in like 2010, 2012, 2014. And it was like people like Carlos Curbelo or Mia Love, and they were Black and Hispanic and young and believed in climate change and didn't, obviously had major differences with Democrats, but they were not, they weren't like beating the drum of racial grievance in the way that Trump and his people have. Right. And basically what happened is when Trump came in, many of those people got wiped out. And so, and they lost their either primaries or their reelection campaigns. And so, one of the things that is really important to remember, and I'm glad you brought it up about this generation, is that it's the most racially diverse generation in history, until the one right after it, which is Gen Z, which is like slightly, because essentially every generation is getting more diverse as time goes on. And so diversity is something that is just like accepted. It's not something that feels like it needs to be explained or argued for anymore. And you even see with, that's why I thought it was really important to include young Republicans in this book, in order to like look at what are the things that people across an age cohort seem to be largely agreeing on versus things that are divided by party, right? So like even gay marriage is something that even young conservatives are just like, we've given up on that. Huh. Like everyone, like gay people, everyone get married, fantastic. Let's move forward. The Christian right has a much weaker hold on this generation of conservatives than it did on boomers. But one of the sort of how do I put this? The flip side of that is that one of the only things that's actually driving young people towards the Republican Party, because there are a lot of things driving young people away from the Republican Party, right?
I'm really excited to hear what you're about to tell me. What is it?
Yeah. So it's in some ways PC culture. So if you look at Dan Crenshaw is this young Republican in Texas. He served honorably in the military. He's like an up and coming Republican star. And his whole thing is like everyone's too sensitive. Stop being so offended all the time. Like, I don't need to be PC. And there are a lot of young people on college campuses who might not necessarily be with the Republicans on taxes or on climate change, or they're not particularly religious, or they're not, they wouldn't be attracted to the conservatives or to the GOP at all, except that they feel attacked by young progressives, and they feel insufficiently progressive, and they feel like they're being canceled or they're being mocked, or if they accidentally misgender somebody, it's a whole thing. And that's driving them towards the Republicans.
It's so fascinating. That whole thing I could talk about for hours and hours and hours. I struggle with it. I'm very confused by all of that. As a stand-up comedian especially, it's a whole different story. All right, before I let you go, I want to ask you one question. You've been covering the presidential campaign, and you were, I think, on the bus with Pete Buttigieg, right? You've got to know him pretty well. You interviewed him for the book, right? Did you? Yeah.
So a couple times.
So what is the, I'm not going to ask you to make any predictions about who the nominee is going to be because it's kind of a waste of time for anybody to do that. But what is the issue with him? I can't see him being the nominee for one simple point. He polls at like 0% with people of color. And we can talk about why that is for a long time. Some people say it's homophobia. Some people say he hasn't, done a good job reaching out. You write about all of these things as well, and we can talk about it. But my question is more about a prediction specifically about him. How can he or anybody in the Democratic Party at this point in the national level running for the presidential nomination win the nomination without getting a certain, I would say, arguably high percentage of black folks voting for them? I mean, and do you see any way that he can overcome that?
No, I mean, well, so this is I think it's a really good question, and this is sort of the problem, and in a lot of ways, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy for him because, I've spent a lot of time talking to black residents of South Bend and also black voters in places like South Carolina. And I think a key distinction is that when I bring up Pete Buttigieg with these voters, they're not like, ew, fuck that guy, I hate him, he's racist. It's not a hatred of him. It's just like, who? Oh, whatever. Like it's that he hasn't built connections in that community. He hasn't been there for a long, he hasn't put in the time and work, and people don't know who he is. But I think that it's because of it's such a contested primary, and there are so many different people running who have different strengths in different communities. I mean, by the way, Kamala Harris and Cory Booker were both polling like right around where Pete was with black voters in South Carolina. Like, Kamala Harris has since dropped out, so he's not the only, all of the candidates except for Joe Biden are not doing well with black voters. Bernie Sanders is doing a little bit better than the rest, but like everybody is not. It's like black voters right now are really solidly with Joe Biden. I feel like it's a trust issue, Charlotte. Like if I'm a man in the workplace, it's going to take a long time, a lot of behavior before women will trust me, because and that's understandable, unfortunately. And the same goes for race. If I'm a white person in the workplace or at college or anywhere, running for office, trying to sell anything. As a comedian, it's going to take a while for black people to trust me. Joe Biden was chosen by the first black president. So there's an implicit trust there, and we can try to unpack Cory Booker or Kamala Harris and what happened there. But isn't it just a matter of historically discriminated against gender or race and trust? Yes, absolutely. And to answer your first question, you cannot win the Democratic primary without winning voters of color, like, period. And one of the things that is really hard, and this is a sort of uncomfortable truth about the country we live in, which is compounded by all kinds of like structural unfairnesses like the Electoral College, which is like, and the Senate, which are both really tilted towards rural white people, right? Is that you can't win the Democratic primary without appealing without getting a significant amount of support from Black voters in particular and voters of color generally. But you also can't win the general election without a lot of solid white suburban support from like, the suburbs in Wisconsin or the suburbs in Pennsylvania, right? And so for the Democrats, they need to find a candidate who can do both.
Okay, well, good luck to them on that. So final question, what impact, what influence will my friend Kevin Costner's endorsement of Pete Buttigieg have for him? I mean,
Oh, I don't think any.
He's in Iowa. I mean, that's the field of dreams. Yeah. He's going to help him win Iowa.
I mean, Pete could definitely win Iowa. Right now, he's like leading in Iowa. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins, but also
once you get to the South Carolina, it's
yeah. I mean, I think that this gets to like the central problem for Democrats, which is that Democrats have this very loud activist base who are pushing the Democratic Party towards a more, racially diverse, intersectional, and progressive future, which I think personally that's great.
Course.
Like that's, and on the other hand, they also have these sort of, no offense, fairly like run of the mill moderates who are, running and winning in places like Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Illinois, Pennsylvania, right? So in some ways it's like they have the progressives who are changing the conversation, which really needs to be changed. And then they have the moderates who are actually flipping seats and putting points on the board. And those two groups are not working together very well.
Charlotte Alter on Twitter. That's her Twitter handle. She's awesome. You got to follow her there. Subscribe to Time Magazine so you can read her at Time. And her new book is The Ones We've Been Waiting For, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. Charlotte, I'm so excited for your success. I'm so excited for the book. It comes out in February. Pre-order it now. Thanks for talking to me today, and I look forward to talking to you again right before the book comes out. We'll just keep promoting it because it's so important.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks so much, Pete. It's always so good to talk to you.
All right, Charlotte. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, Charlotte Alter. So excited about that book. Please tweet her and say, I heard you on the Stand Up Pete Dominic podcast. I'm getting your book at Charlotte Alter. And now for a final guest, a final conversation with longtime listener and a guy who's become a really good friend, a confidant, a supporter, always has a different, interesting, well-informed perspective. You might not agree with him. You might not agree with anybody whose point of view you hear, but well-informed when it comes to politics, a real Washington insider. My friend Bill B. in D.C. Hey, if you want to be a guest on this show, you got something to offer, an expertise, an analysis of something, let me know. Email me or DM me on Twitter, standupwithpete@gmail.com. I reached out to my friend Bill. We talked about impeachment. We talked about the presidential campaign. And the audio is not perfect, just the way that we connected. But I think it's pretty great, and I think the conversation's even better, but we're figuring out all the kinks. Sign up for patreon.com, and you can let me know what you like and don't like there or anywhere else. I don't know why I'm plugging Patreon. Here's my conversation with Bill. Well, at SiriusXM, I cultivated a following of very smart folks, many of which I became good friends with, and my guest right now is no exception. You heard him call into SiriusXM a lot. If you listen to that show, we're really good friends. He gives me great analysis and advice and has a lot of informed opinions, very educated and passionate about history and philosophy. Political science is the ultimate D.C. insider because he lives in D.C. He's on Twitter at Bill B. in D.C. I mean, at Bill B. D.C. is his Twitter handle. And Bill, you are on the show because I wanted to have a conversation with you. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Here's your music. He's Irish. Do you like that? Does that work for you? Huh? Would you... He's also...
the Pogues, maybe.
He's also Catholic. Would you prefer this? Is that better for an intro?
I'm Irish Catholic, so fuck that. Straight to hell.
Straight to hell. Do you ever tell people to go to hell? Do you use that in anger?
No, I don't really believe in hell, so I wouldn't really bother.
Why don't you?
I stick with the real Irish locution, which is fuck off.
I thought you were going to tell me a real Irish philosophy about hell, but you meant the locution.
I think fuck off is a very deep Irish philosophy.
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's loving, I think, even.
It can be, sure.
All right, so we have a couple of things that we want to talk about today that you reached out to me about. You listened to the analysis from my friend, constitutional law scholar Eric Siegel, who you know and like and respect, as well as my brother, who you know and like and respect. You have a different view in terms of the way that the impeachment is playing out. You have a different view, in fact, also of the Democrats running for president, right? Am I right about these two things, that this is what we're discussing?
Yeah, although it's not like a really direct critique of either Eric or your brother. It's more that I think that in general, people do their analysis based upon what they bring to it in the first place. You're a pessimist, all of this is going to look awful to you. If you're an optimist who watched way too much of the fucking West Wing, then you're going to think this is like, there's going to be a sudden moment where it's all going to get resolved. And I think that most people really are kind of stuck in, there's a French historical school, called the Annales School, where they talk about longue durée, long-term history, and eventual history, which is the shit that's happening day to day. Journalism and sort of what people normally talk about is eventual history, and people spend way too much time stuck in that. And I think that's where Eric is. I think your brother, and I think most people are.
In terms of looking, let me rephrase it, looking at the kind of day-to-day news cycle, reacting to it, kind of the short game versus the longer game of how history sees it, more importantly, maybe even more specifically, how the impeachment or the day-to-day campaign gossip, speeches, et cetera, are playing out today versus where they will be, what role impeachment will play or anything that happened on the campaign close to the election?
Well, in this sense, Trump didn't come out of nowhere. Trump is not somebody who really changed very much about what was going on in America. He's a symptom of what was going on in America. And so this long run of history, you end up in a situation that's fucked up, which leads you to a fucked up president. And so the impeachment is just a symptom of that. The reaction to the impeachment, what the Democrats are doing, for instance, they're not trying to get like a one-shot, one-kill. It's not going to happen, and frankly, it wouldn't solve our problem anyway. What Schiff and the Democrats are doing is leveraging the entire situation to make life harder for Democrats and to try to sort of change the foundational politics rather than get somebody out there and go, whoa, this is the thing that's going to change it all today. It's not. It's a death by 1,000 cuts strategy, and that's the only thing that ever works.
So be more specific now, exactly what you mean in terms of the Democrats' strategy in both the House impeachment hearings and now the Senate.
Okay, so good example is that what the Democrats are doing right now is dripping one bad thing after another that doesn't make it, or makes it harder, I should say, for the Republicans to just dismiss the case and kick it to the curb. And they're really making it not about Trump anymore, but about the senators, and particularly the vulnerable senators that are up for election in the fall, like Collins, Tillis, Gardner, those folks. They're making it about their judgment and about whether they are honest or dishonest. And that is a really canny long-term game thing to do, because in the end, if we take the Senate back, even if we lose the White House, Trump is already much more in a much more precarious position than he would be before.
All right, so let me just try to take issue with that, or try to push back in the idea that when you say they're making it harder to kick it to the curb, the evidence, the arguments that Democrats are making it harder for Republicans, especially these vulnerable Republicans, to deny the truth that they're hearing. But I guess the argument would be they can. They just go up there in front of microphones and cameras, Bill, and they say it didn't happen, or if it did happen, it's not an abuse, or it's not worthy of impeachment, or they just attack the messengers. They don't take on the actual issues and arguments and points that the Democrats are raising, the evidence, if you will. They can just dismiss it, and it works.
Right, but what's going on here, though, is that elections are won and lost in a place like Maine and a place like Colorado on the margins. Yes, literally 97% of your voters either don't pay attention or are so stuck in their own lane that they never bother to look and think about this. But in a normal election, about 7% of voters are actually gettable. And guess what? Those are the people who pay the most attention. And so if you have that 7% in modern American politics, that's a killer. That is a 40-state win if you get all 7% of those people. So yes, the majority of people don't pay attention, but of the voting public, there is a very gettable, solid 7% that makes all the difference in the world. So don't worry about the guy in the gas station who doesn't pay attention to this. Be thinking about, and what the Pelosi and Schiff and the Democrats are thinking about are those folks on the margin in the middle that are gettable. And what they're doing is very well aimed at them.
So what your analysis is more of kind of a political an election outcomes analysis versus the analysis that some others are making, which is more of a more general sentiment and a more, as you're saying, pessimistic. You're trying to be specific with what is going to win specific elections that in one case will help the Democrats take back the Senate, and I suppose in another case to help the Democratic nominee beat Trump in November. That's the difference, is how you look at things.
Let me put it this way. It's good to be moral in politics, but there are no fucking moral victories. You've got to win elections. And if you don't win elections, then the people that oppose you are the ones who push forward American policy.
Well, who's being moral in politics? What do you mean by that? Or what's the immoral opinion or that you're saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good?
Yes, and also that in the end, the reality is winning elections is it. Everything else is bullshit. It doesn't matter how good you are, how great your policy is. If you can't get 51% and take control of chambers and take control of executive offices, then you're a West Wing fan. Basically.
Okay. So what do you think that the Democrats have done specifically or are doing when it comes to impeachment that will help them win elections around the country in November of 2020?
The number one thing they're doing is keeping it going for a very long time in ways that don't in any way read down to the president's benefit. Back Bill Clinton's era, when he got impeached, it helped him over the long run. What we're clearly seeing with Donald Trump is it's not helping him very much at all. And in fact, the numbers for him being impeached are now 51% or so. And they're starting to look just as solid as his disapproval rating. And so I think that what Democrats are doing here, by doing it the way they're doing it, making sure that everyone's clear they're lying through their teeth, and that the Republicans will do virtually anything and sell their souls in order to make sure this doesn't happen. It underlines for the average voter that these guys are basically scum, and that they're not there for anyone else's benefit.
I suppose some people would just say, well, who is the average voter? Who are the people in the middle, the swing voters? What voters where are you specifically talking about, Bill, that are being affected by these hearings, which some might argue nobody is really watching because of when they take place and how they take place and the optics of them, which are being controlled by Moscow, Mitch. When did we start being okay with calling people shitty nicknames? Trump started that, and and Republicans, I should say, and Rush Limbaugh and radio people, and now Democrats and liberals have completely adopted them, from Chris Hayes all the way to the smartest philosophy, leftist in the room is saying Moscow and Cocaine Mitch. I feel like that's right. We've given in.
I don't know how you put a deep sigh into a radio or podcast, but just
you don't like it. Did. You don't like it.
No, I mean, I get it though. I mean, it makes sense, and it's actually a really old school American thing to do. But I would say this about what the Democrats are doing. Remember, it's not just a proactive thing that they're hitting Trump here or hurting him there. It also means that Trump has an incredibly difficult time moving on to anything else. He can't build up a conversation that makes him look great. He can't build up a conversation that makes him look great in any other way. The point is that Democrats, what they're doing isn't just sort of a proactive thing that is hurting Trump on any particular issue. What they're doing is denying him the ability to move on to anything else. As long as impeachment, and as long as the outcomes of impeachment and the things that have fallen out and come out, and the worst deals and the bigger problems come out from impeachment, Trump can't build up any momentum politically on anything else. And that, I got to tell you something, elections are not necessarily won on some super ninja move politically. It's often won on the attrition in the ground game. And that's what Pelosi has wished on Trump, and it's working.
Well, it's all interesting analysis. I tend to think that you're often right. You were wrong about Trump reacting to the Iranian missile launch that you thought he would bomb Tehran. I
did.
Do you still think that might happen, or do you will you concede that? Are you happy that you were wrong about that?
Oh, I'm very happy to be wrong about that. But that situation, I'm really surprised that I was wrong, and here's why. They could not have handled that in a worse way by any analytical framework. And the reason I'm saying that is that Trump,
the administration could not have handled what? Because I kind of jumped in on
they picked the fight, right?
They assassinated the Iranian military general.
Right. And then the Iranians fired back and they hit an American base. And they didn't just hit like around the base in the sand like the Trump administration tried to pretend happened. They nailed like multiple buildings from about 400 miles away very accurately. And then on top of that, the Trump administration, then that happens, Trump administration says, oh, no, they just hit the sand. And then the Trump administration says, oh, no, they didn't hurt anybody. It actually turns out that 24 American soldiers were concussed and injured, and they were super accurate. And what that means, I mean, with the missiles, they were super accurate. So what the Iranians are getting out of that is that we've told everybody in the neighborhood that we can really hit them precisely. And guess what? The Americans are going to back down even when we hurt them. And that is waving a red flag in front of a bull. We've basically empowered Iran, and we've made them look great in the region as far as geopolitical calculations go.
Yeah, we played the wrong game there. Made the wrong play for sure. Okay, so did that get? Oh, let's talk about Bernie Sanders, Joe Rogan, and the presidential campaign. Again, you were reacting to some things said on previous podcasts here about the campaign, some general, conventional wisdom that we're hearing throughout the media, including some of the things that I think that maybe you and I disagree on. So where do you want to start with that?
I'm really shocked that the Bernie campaign was not smart enough to keep a bit of distance between Bernie and Rogan himself. You assume these guys do their due diligence and go out and, test and look at what people have said in the past. If Bernie had his surrogates say, hey, everybody clap ourselves in the back, we got Rogan's endorsement, and never actually touched it himself, he would have been fine. But by going out personally and doing that, you then have every Joe Rogan statement, like about going to see the movie in a black neighborhood, like it's Planet of the Apes, and then the transphobic stuff. And I personally think—
And by that you mean, just quickly, sorry to interrupt, but by that you mean, in reacting to it, the Bernie Sanders for President campaign made an actual campaign video from his campaign of the Rogan endorsement from the Joe Rogan show.
No, I think Rogan made that endorsement with Barry Weiss while he was on his own show. And then Bernie's campaign put out a statement saying, Bernie himself did, saying this is great. We got Rogan's endorsement.
Well, no, Rogan said it on his show, and the Bernie campaign just grabbed it and put Bernie for president around it, basically.
Right, but the mistake, and this may sound really like inside baseball, but the mistake was Bernie himself put out I think it was a statement or a tweet that said, this is great, I got endorsed by Joe Rogan. And that, I know that sounds dumb, but if you avoid doing that and let your surrogates do it, you're not liable for every statement the person endorsing you has ever made. So I'm literally saying it was a
Do you think it matters, though? I mean, does it matters a lot. Going back to your analysis on impeachment and why, what you said about the kind of minute or macro issues and attrition, how these things pile up over time between now and I guess you want to say the Iowa caucuses, the primaries, or the convention. I don't know what date you're looking at, but what does this mean in the long run that he put out a statement thanking Rogan? Why? Who's turned off?
It's not the end of the world. It's not some huge thing that's going to burn Bernie's campaign. Yeah. But problem with it is that to a lot of people who are not fans of Bernie, and by the way, I plan to vote for him if he wins the nomination. So
yeah, you better. I mean, anybody who's not going to vote, from Andrew Yang to Pete Buttigieg to me or you,
anybody but Gabbard. But to put it in, it's important to say that.
So you're voting for Gabbard over Trump?
I would think about it, yeah, but I wouldn't want to. But
come on,
just the thing about Bernie is that he has a long-term reputation, which I think is fairly well earned, of not being particularly sensitive to minorities. Black voters have a real problem with Bernie on that stuff. He is not. He's an old guy.
He's from Vermont. I mean, he did grow up in Brooklyn, you know, but
Right.
it's a long time ago. He grew up with dinosaurs.
Right. And so the issue is that this one thing is not a big deal. He did himself a campaign disservice, particularly just as it looked like he was really picking up momentum into Iowa to create this distraction.
Oh, come on. I don't know if he's lost momentum, and specifically,
I don't know if he has either.
Well, who's he turned off? Who's now really fired up and mad about this Rogan thing? That going back to your earlier point, that it's enough of an impact of a demographic that it affects him, or throws, you know, the influence of the weight to somebody else.
Yeah, no, I don't think in and of itself. I'm not necessarily sure it has all that much impact for Bernie in a positive sense to get Rogan's voters. I'm not quite sure that those folks are all out there voting. I'm just saying that as I think it gets both blown up and it gets minimized. It gets blown up because people act like it's the end of the world, but they minimize it in that they kind of forget that it belongs to part of a pattern. And where it really bothers me, honestly, it really bothers me, is if Bernie wins the nomination, he's got to be better at campaigning than this if he wants to beat Trump.
Well, we could talk about what is then to come, but it would be mostly speculation. I think one of the most accurate criticisms that we've heard, and a lot of folks across the certainly progressive, liberal political spectrum, as well as folks on the right, have said Bernie's not been tested by the right-wing fear and rage machine, the Hannitys, the Mark Levins, and of course the leader of them all, the president, in terms of the socialism label, or what else are they going to ping him with? He's Russian. Well, that won't work for him. They love Russians.
Yeah. Well, that's actually going to be fascinating.
Honeymooned in the Soviet Union, therefore he wants bread lines and all that bullshit.
He praised Cuba and he praised the Soviet Union, and he had his honeymoon in Yaroslavl, Russia, when it was the Soviet Union.
What do they hit him with? And what's effective if he gets the nomination?
They hit him with all of that, but the big thing they hit him with, the meta message, will be Bernie's a socialist, and that they're going to take away everything that you like. And I hate to tell you this, the polling on that looks like it's got grab. It looks like it can push people. And that sucks because it's absolutely ridiculous that a president who is effectively a appanage of Russian organized crime gets to call somebody a socialist and get away with it. But that's where we are right now.
I don't know what the hell an appanage is. I don't think anybody else does, you smart son of a bitch.
Add it on too. Sorry. Oh. Yeah.
You should apologize to a lot more than just me. Okay, so, all right. But there are two different kinds of schools of thought in terms of the more moderate candidate is more likely to beat President Trump because they're more acceptable to the, quote, middle, whatever, or the more progressive candidate is more likely to beat President Trump because you bring out a whole bunch of people that weren't excited to vote, weren't excited, by the way, to volunteer for, don't see. You know, there's a huge segment of the population, mostly young people, but certainly a lot of others that want to see systemic change, really big changes that Bernie Sanders has been talking about his whole career. Which school of thought does Bill B in D.C. fall into, or are you open to both? I'm open to both.
I'm open to all of them. I think that, honestly, I'm not a fan of Buttigieg. I think Buttigieg is kind of a no-labels candidate. I'm not up for that.
What does that mean?
Like kind of that centrist bullshit where really he sounds like a McKinsey consultant. And, I'm a centrist myself, but, I don't want somebody who lived in a big city where the number of black policemen went from whatever it was, 26 to 6, and it wasn't even an issue for him to even think about it.
Well, all the black people, he said in the last debate, all the black people that know him well trust him and believe in him. And my tweet was, yeah, both of them.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
There's not that many black people in South Bend, and of those that there are, they're not exactly huge Pete Buttigieg supporters, is my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong. Sorry if I am.
I live in an African-American neighborhood, and I have forever, and I got to tell you, when they think of him, they don't think of him well. And this, by the way, gets to Joe Biden.
That's because black men especially hate gay people, people say.
I don't run into that. I got to tell you, I don't.
You bring it up to them?
Sure, of course. There's a gay pride flag on my front lawn. Nobody bothers me about it. So, it's they
know you're straight, that you're just an ally. They're not weirded out by you and your husband that moved into the neighborhood and gaying it up.
Plenty of gay friends, male.
Yeah, I'm saying that there is this thread, which I'm vulnerable to, believing that there's this thread in the black community, especially with men, that there's a kind of a homophobia there. Anecdotally, I see it, and otherwise, it's just a certain distrust of a Midwestern, mayor who's done the wrong thing, sided with police over blacks. But I don't know that most people, much less black folks, are paying that close attention to Pete Buttigieg's record there. It's more, that's the gay guy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I got to tell you something.
I'm happy to be wrong, so if anybody wants to call me a racist and a monster for my insinuations, by all means, I hope I'm wrong.
I would say two things. That number one, I think that the black people definitely know about Buttigieg. I mean, my experience, and again, anecdotal.
His
but
record?
They just know in a vague sense that he was mayor of South Bend and that there were like issues with black folks and
all right, I did this to you. Let's not get going down on what black people know and think about him because we both have our anecdotes. But let's go back to the no labels, candidate, why you don't like Buttigieg. But more importantly, you said I'm a moderate. Bill, what does that even mean? And let me be specific. What kind of progressive lefty policy or idea has Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders presented that makes you feel squeamish or what? Because that's the Overton window. That's the way to determine what a moderate is today. Because now it's like these labels don't mean anything because it's either you're a conspiracy cultist or not. Right. That's the way I look at it.
I got to tell you, I think that's a good question that I have not really asked myself. Okay. And I would say that the reality is it's more about language than it is about specific policy. I'm pretty much open to anything that I think will work. I mean, I'm an employer. I employ over 100 people in D.C. And
well, you're a capitalist. That makes you a moderate.
I'm very much a capitalist.
Yeah, see, that makes you a moderate.
Yeah, I mean, I started, but at the same time, most of the guys in my industry in Washington, D.C. were in favor of the minimum wage going up to $15 an hour.
A lot of people don't know what you do. Bill rents out bouncy castles in the D.C. area, in the Virginia, right? What's it called? Bill's Bounce House?
Bill's Bounces, yeah. My wife was joking the other day, we got to start a company called Bill Pickle, which I thought would be, a little, because I'm a bit of a pickle thing. So.
Oh, you like to pickle vegetables?
I'm enormously, douchily, nerdily, truly.
I'm into it too. I'll buy them. All right, so where are we? Bernie, moderate. Who do you think?
So what would I object to? Almost nothing.
Okay.
I mostly object to knowing how to get shit done and having a good sense of what is capable, what is possible, and what is not. And often I find that people on the left, if I counsel prudence and working with the other side to get things done, I get okay boomer. And so it's almost like I'm culturally in the center, even though I'm fairly left in my politics.
What else, Bill? Before I let you go, I love talking to you. We usually talk offline. I'm happy to have you on the podcast, along with hopefully a lot more really smart people who just pay close attention to these things, have a lot of education. We put so much faith and value into the pundits on TV, and they are not necessarily ever more accurate or more intelligent than just the smart politics people in your life, and you've always been influential. You've always helped me with my commentary. You've given me all kinds of advice and lines to use, and I've used them. So I have a lot of respect for your opinion. Doesn't mean I agree with it. Doesn't mean I agree with my brother or Eric Siegel. I'm trying to give people a wide perspective of opinions here. And so anything you want to close with? Anything else that you're paying attention to that we didn't get to?
I would just say that in the end, this election, regardless of who wins on the Democratic side, is going to be you getting every single person out to vote. And it doesn't matter whether it's in New Jersey or if it's in New York.
Including for the person who doesn't necessarily jazz you up and lube up your loins.
Chances are, in fact, I'm not jazzed up by any single Democratic candidate. I'm not. Biden, nobody. But we've got to fucking win because the fate literally of the country and potentially of the world hangs on it.
The planet. I mean, for sure the planet.
Absolutely.
For sure the climate change issue. For sure.
And that's the reality. We're literally in an election that will probably decide how awful or how good our timeline goes.
Yeah,
so
I think that's more accurate now than ever. All right, before I let you go, one more bonus question, and without thinking about it, I want people to react to Bill here on Twitter for anything he said, but especially this at Bill B DC on Twitter.
At Bill B in DC.
At Bill B in DC. I'll never get it right. At Bill B in DC. Your reaction, sir, to Andrew Yang and the Yang Gang. Go.
Bores the fuck out of me.
What?
It's a bunch of weedy, nerdy guys who, they're like the Elon. He's like the
weedy,
Elon
like potheads. You mean?
It's like the Elon Musk of presidential candidates. Like, like Elon Musk is like, hey, we're going to build tunnels in the ground and have safe travel that way. And it's like, motherfucker, we invented subways 150 years ago. Yang does the same thing in politics, and it just bores me to death.
Oh, interesting, Bill.
Yeah.
All right, next time we talk, it'll be autonomous cars.
Oh,
and,
awesome.
And anything else that you want to discuss. And we should do this more often, as well as other folks who are real smart. You want to join me? This is very easy for me to do, and I love doing it. I love talking to smart people and having these conversations. I'm so lonely. I'm just home.
Sure, Pete. I'll do the autonomous car vehicle and any other thing you ever want the rest of your life if you bring me like an autonomous car, quote unquote, expert as like a blood sacrifice for me, because I will absolutely tear these fucking guys to pieces.
All right. Maybe you can find the person you want to discuss and debate with.
Fantastic.
I'll figure it out. All right. Thanks,
I'll send
buddy.
Suggestions.
Follow Bill and argue with him on Twitter. He's good. He's good on the Twitter at Bill B in DC. Thank you.
Cheers.
All right. That's a wrap. That is a wrap on episode 40 of Stand Up. Really mixing it up with the guests, the number of guests, the things I'm doing. What do you like? What don't you like? You want more guests? You want more episodes? What do you want? I want to be delivering whatever you want in terms of information and entertainment and enlightenment. Let me know. Reach out. Give me some feedback. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Sustain the podcast on patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Subscribe, give it a rating. Tell me where you listen, by the way. Which podcast service do you listen? If you listen all the way to the end here, then you get an award and a trophy. Okay, you get nothing, but you get my thanks, and I'll give you a call, and we'll talk, and I want to hear from you, so let me know. That is it. I will talk to you on what day is it? Next episode will be this Friday. It will be February, won't it be? Will it be February? This Friday? No, it'll be the 28th. On the 29th, I'll be at the Comic Strip in Dangerfields in New York City. I'll be headlining Levity Live on February 6th, levitylive.com. Go get your tickets for that. And that's all the plugs for today. Thank you to my guests, my wife, Valerie, Charlotte Alter, and Bill B. in D.C. Talk to you soon. Bye.